We are Econet, and I am Andrius Kulikauskas, you may know of Math for Wisdom. We at Econet are an investigatory community learning to investigate alongside each other for a culture of investigation. And so today we're going to start with Steph Macurdy's question: what is complexity? What do we do or could we do to foster and nurture, cultivate complexity? And then Montijn will be leading us, and he'll, at a certain point, perhaps drift us into questions of morality or dialogue or however he feels inspired. So why don't I welcome Montijn? We also have Jere Northrop and Andrej Bugaev, and we may be joined by Ben Divry. Montijn, please.
All right. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. So generally, we're here not only for morality, what to do, but also just knowledge in and of itself. And out of the idea that knowledge is always an answer for a question, I think I'm fairly convinced of that, and we can talk about that. But with that idea in mind, to really understand somebody, we have to understand the question first they are posing, because that is going to be that's going to create a slot where the knowledge can be stored essentially. So Steph has a certain question, and for us, we have to actually question the question until we know how we should even answer it. So the question again was, how should we foster Steph, could you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm not going to lead with what is complexity, because in my email response, I do have a love-hate relationship with the word complexity. You can either embed enormous structure, richness, life, order, chaos, beauty into it, or you can have imprecision, noise, mumbo jumbo, lacking definable characteristics. So I say that so that when I try to use complexity, I try to limit my use of that word. And so the question that I do want to ask is, how do we cultivate a collective that is increasing? I actually don't know what the question is, but it's surrounding complexity. So I don't want to say what is complexity, but I do want to know how to cultivate more richness, structure, order, beauty. And maybe complexity is a good label for all of those things.
I see. I will just give my first shorthand thoughts when I think about the interest of that question, see if I understand it, and other people can then follow with their own ideas. So when I think of complexity, I almost associate it with emergence. And this idea, when you talk about cultivating complexity, we already corresponded a bit in the mails, but I felt really that in some way we have no control over what we do, because every action of the total body can be just reduced to smallest, that everything can be reduced to billiard balls, somewhat bumping into each other, and that we do have a kind of a say in. So also societies are a complex structure, like how we do with banks, etc. There's all emergence from the smaller things underneath it. But even though we say everything is reducible to these billiard balls just bumping into each other, somehow and for some way, and without sounding contradicting, we can still say, well, we wish to stare at this complexity in some way or another. So there's just like this almost paradoxical thinking. And I think that it can be resolved by just talking about, well, let's talk about resolving that later. But just there's a paradoxical thinking that, yes, everything is determined by local billiard balls, and that make up everything of our movements, make everything of our societies. But yet it still seems meaningful to talk about what kind of can we stir this emergence in one way or another by just spreading this thing. And then the question is, how do we stir that so that we have these different kind of societies sprouting out from just our different kind of behavior? And if so, you know how to do that, then the question also becomes in what way to do it. So I think these are two interesting questions. So that's how I associate your question.
I find that helpful. I find that if the space of exploration is enormous, then how one defined question can give us a slice or a perspective to orient through that. And if we agree that is the right question or a good question, then we can align and we can do some of that steering, or we can do some of that mitigation, or we can reduce what is reducible, but also acknowledge that there is an inevitable irreducibility. There's potentially some things that are just not reducible in that question, in that framework.
All right. If someone else wants to interrupt with a question or something, please do. But now I'm just going to respond. What is the significance of irreducibility, for example, to those two questions just from now? Just how to steer this complexity into any desired outcome we want, which is like a very practical scientific question. And then a more moral question, what direction, which actual direction should we steer to? Do you understand? Like, how should I understand irreducibility as relevant to these two questions? Can you, if you understand me?
Well, yes, you're using reducibility, and the opposite or counter to that is irreducibility. So reducibility is what we may all agree that is something we can wrap our hands around. We can simplify, or we can label it, or we can find axioms that describe its behavior. But then there's an aspect that I believe to be true about complex systems that has inherent irreducibility, meaning the space is wide enough where randomness and chaos is just persistent. It's either inherent to the universe or beyond what these observers are capable of compressing.
Maybe I would jump in. I appreciate this question very much, and in some of the conversations I've had, I think with Andrej, maybe Jere, this idea came out that complexity is really about independent origins. Okay, so that there's a system is complex if it's coming from different dimensions, different directions, different resulting in different properties, and so that lets you have combinations. So as Montijn was saying, like if you have independent billiard balls, right? Like, well, there's going to be sources of complexity. So one way to flip that around is to say, well, if you have a system already, if you can reduce it, that's a way of kind of like identifying independence, to say like this chunk and this chunk really are independent. They don't have any connection with each other, right? So when we have this whole algebra of systems, on the one hand, we have this whole power or just wonder of having completely independent wills or independent agents or independent origins coming together. And then we're interested, how can they come together in some kind of harmony? And so that there could be like an alignment or maybe like a unity, right? Even though the origins are different. So in that sense, like rather than start, I mean, we may start like with a God who's just a starting point, but a fulfillment of God or a transcendence of God is to have this multiple sources that can nevertheless find, discover, align, come together in God or in unity or in oneness, right? Like that's kind of like the dynamic that we want. So if you flip it around and say, okay, we have a system, is it reducible? Can it be breaking down? And there's the local independence, but somehow there's this global ultimate constraint or ultimate nature where there's something about wholeness, where wholeness is transcending this independence. Wholeness is saying, look, you all live in the same conceptual world, you all live in the same, principles of love or whatever it is. So that there's this kind of like dynamics or principles of love that transcends everything. And that even if you get rid of God, even if you get everything, but somehow there's the nature of everything is that we're going to be able to have something, some way to come together. So in linear algebra, especially in the type of math I've been studying, which is very much trying to describe that holisticness, in linear algebra, you have exactly those concepts of reducibility and irreducibility. So if you have a matrix And you can write that matrix as, let's say, two matrices, two submatrices on the diagonal. Then when they act on a vector space, one matrix will act on
Yes.
part of the vector space, let's say 3 dimensions, and the other one will act on 4 more dimensions. And so they just don't see each other. They don't need to see each other. But what you're kind of looking for is you want to know those atoms, like what are the irreducibles where you can't break down that clock into mini clocks. That clock is like a feature. And then in the particular case where I'm looking at that's turned out to be, you kind of want to find the maximal irreducible chunk. Like to say there could be small atomic pieces, but like what's the biggest atom, like uranium or whatever, like, that kind of like is the atom in which all the atoms could fit, let's say, right? Like, so maybe it's uranium or whatever it is. And so maybe I'll pause for now, but I'll be able to give some of the results we're getting from this mathematical and philosophical thinking. It's very cool. Andrej, Jere, do you guys have something to
Yes.
add?
Yeah, so well, first of all, thanks for Steph for clarifying at the very beginning that very careful word label. Yes, it's just a proper name for label things, but complexity itself is just a sub-product of a sophisticated, well-working system or something. Nevertheless, perhaps right now we need to cultivate for a simple reason because for many years the humanity and it's a part of our nature because we are limited in our abilities. We have a constant like illness, a tendency to simplify things. And even things that are irreducible were reduced during evolution, during our system creation, and so on and so on. So perhaps that's the problem. We reduced irreducible things and made many steps forward, perhaps like humanity in many systems where we built. And right now, perhaps we should look back and cultivate that complexity to understand that this is the limiting factor. The complexity itself has no value in a similar way that money have no value. It's like a fuel for your car. The value is what are you going with your car? Where are you driving with that fuel? So fuel do not have the value. The same thing for complexity itself doesn't have the value, but perhaps it is one of the main limiting factors for many decades, for many centuries. And right now, when we have AI, an era of AI, perhaps we have much more possibilities to sustain and to work with complex things. And perhaps cultivating the complexity is the right moment to do is right now. So it's like a limitation which we forgot about, and perhaps it is the most important, giving our us new possibilities.
Well said. I agree. Montijn, you're on mute.
Anyone else want to react to it? Jere, otherwise I will go back to the question answer and see where we now have made progress. All right. And I must say I was a bit so before Andrius took over, when Andrius took over, I was thinking about what's the question that Steph is trying to answer. And I was thinking about actually that is the question in and of itself. What is the interesting question about complexity? We can wrap our heads around. So I would like to take a few steps back and think about an interesting question. And one answer, this question I would like to propose, which I found interesting, which I wish to share if you guys also find this interesting, is why is it even meaningful? For example, let's talk about complexity and also how we understood it. Complexity in, for example, society. So societal structures are emergent features of human interactions. And we can talk about, well, how do we wish to structure society? One can now ask oneself, why is this meaningful if it is an emergent property of human interactions, where every human interaction in itself is reducible to perhaps smaller parts? So why is it then meaningful to even talk here about if you know it's going to be the end of it all? So how would, if first, before we even start answering the question, do we understand the question? Why is it meaningful to even talk about structuring society, knowing it's all just emergent from human interactions? And so maybe it's a very simple question, and people know the answer. Maybe it's a very simple answer.
Just with regard to the question as stated, like, just because let's say it's true that like these things emerge, right? Like naturally, let's say, but that's one level of explanation. But just because that's one level of explanation doesn't mean it's the only level, or just because there's one level of causality doesn't mean it's the only level, and it might actually be the least relevant level. So like, just because things happen doesn't mean that we can't make them happen. You see, that's so just in terms of that whole argument, like, yeah.
Let's stick to the question, because perhaps the answer is very simple, and just like you said, because the kind of answer probably is going to be like kind of related to determinism kind of debates, and how do we even sense make of more like thinking about how to structure society if everything is determined anyways. I think that is kind of the underlying issue here with this question. But
see, questions, maybe I think questions, I think there's a lot of importance in the approach you're taking, but questions are a way of sneaking in answers, and answers are a way of sneaking in questions. So like, it's possible to have a question that kind of presumes that there's only one level of explanation, and and if we have it, then
well,
there be
yes,
others?
but that's why you should question the question until you can answer it. But before we go down, this at least one interesting question I think there is, perhaps. But Steph, yeah, the question is still, I think, at the highest level, what's the most interesting question about complexity still? All right, but I think this is an interesting question, which I could have found.
I'm something's coming up. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the question coming up for me is, can we understand each other? Can we coordinate? And that comes up because I know I can have an independent point of view, I think. But I've realized that I could potentially get new answers or new questions when I coordinate with others. And so the question that always comes up for me is like, how can this group align on the right thing, or a good thing, or a shared thing? Not even good or right, just are we talking about the same thing?
Right, that's very helpful. Yeah.
And just maybe I can probe you if you really not have a feeling for it. How would you frame this question in terms of active influence or free energy principle?
Is there a known shared policy for which the group reaches consensus and takes
so
action?
this policy, the policy, it's based on a generative model, right? So to even talk about policies and talk about even having the same kind of future predictions under this kind of policy, we must first even know what the states are, how they transition. So we're talking about, so the main, what's like the weakest thing about, you could say, the generative model, right? We need to have a kind of shared generative model. Will we even speak about aligning in policies?
Yeah, and generative model is it occurs at different scales. So yes. we have 5 here, or we have at any one particular time, or on any particular event we may have 3 and 2, or different combinations.
And now these generative models, what is let's investigate the kind of structure. Let's see if everybody else can follow. So a generative model is a model of the world. So you can just follow the conversation that way. A model of the world. We all have a model of the world. In active inference terms, a generative model of the world. And this generative model, its structure, it's essentially a system of beliefs, right? Where belief is nothing more than a hypothesis class over which there is a certain distribution. That's essentially, when we talk about our model of the world, we can talk about beliefs as nothing more than a lot of mathematical objects as certain domain over which a probability function is defined. Just for the sake of simplicity, let's assume this is this. And now I think we are in the place to talk about the significance of question and answer, because you can interpret each belief spanned by the system as a question the system asks itself.
And what you did there for me, I think, is you just put a boundary, you put a little cocoon around the generative model or a generative model or a system of models so that we could talk about the inner workings, but hold constant the outside. We could keep the
Yes.
external and just
Yes.
function on the internal.
If this is an observation about the analytical advantage of active inference, yes.
I just want to ask first, Jere, do you want to jump in with something? Do you have a thought? You're on mute.
Yeah. Not at this point. It seems to me that this discussion probably would be easier to follow if we were to take a specific generative model or breakdown of complexity, a so-called complex situation, and show how it actually can break down in specific ways. Start to deal with a real system. Like I always go back to these biological systems. You get a little ecosystem that's functioning away. In a way, it's extremely complex, but in another way, it can be viewed in terms of some very simple programs or procedures. So my suggestion would be, we're talking about a lot of abstract stuff here now, and maybe we take a look at a specific example and see if it makes sense or not.
I'd like to. Oh, I'd like to.
Andres, I just wanted to sneak
ahead,
in
Steph,
just
yeah.
a line, a Montaigne line here, which would be, the question is, so do we have a moral need? Or this is how my interpretation takes it. It says, good, we're outlining the map or territory or the boundaries, putting in the rules, we know how the system functions, and then we say, while we're all here, who has a moral need, or do you have a moral need? And if anybody has a moral need, do you want to go and drop into that? And Jere's potentially suggesting, like, it'd be useful to drop into an actual moral need system as we go there.
Let me say, there's clearly a moral need. I mean, we're destroying the damn planet. Look at the carbon dioxide concentration just recently, 433.25 parts per million. It's the highest number I've ever seen. There are massive consequences of that, and so there's a moral need to try and do something about it.
But it's not what
That's the way I see it.
I completely agree that there's urgency. So to relate to that, Steph, this question, and the reason why I went to active inference, because there's most explicit. To even understand each other, we must understand the questions we are asking. Because if we understand the question we are asking, we are opening up the same hypothesis space in our generative model, over which we can formulate our belief, which when then the system can commit to an answer. So we can only have really our aligned on policies, aligned on ideas, when we entertain the same questions. And that effectively says that we have a similar kind of generative model. And so what are the specific interesting questions? Well, this is also the main reason why I have it so explicitly. Do you have a moral need? Do you have the need to follow morals? So that's a question. And this question I can ask myself, and I say yes. But first, I must understand the question. I must know what kind of hypothesis space to open up in my generative model. And I want you first, so I don't really care that there are two ways to react to this, right? One is to disagree with the question that is not even sensical, because we can ask ourselves more questions than are physically relevant. So you can criticize the hypothesis space to even begin with, because that's like saying, is God good or evil? for example, and say you have a certain notion of God that's sitting like an angry guy there in the sky, you can think that question isn't even relevant, right? We should just prune our generative model, throw it away. So there's a question about, is it even relevant? But to even do that, we must understand it. Or the other is to answer it. So whether you're going to answer or criticize the question, in both cases, you should first understand the question I am having in my head. So that's why, but that's like one question. Another question is, well, what is God, blah, blah, blah. But those are interesting questions. We first must understand what kind of hypothesis. Andrius?
So I want to jump in. First of all, we have about 8 minutes left in this Zoom room. And then can we jump over to your Zoom room, Montijn, after this shuts
Sure.
down? And then for the last 10 minutes or so. And then I wanted to say, I can offer a practical thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, which was that although right now I don't have money that I mean, I'm personally, everything is fine with me money-wise. But Ben has, cares about having money to be able to do his desalination invention. Money comes up, of course, in timberfish technologies, other technologies. And I think in general, the problem of like our Econet culture, like what's the role of money? What is money for? How do we work together? That's a very practical thing just to give some thought to, okay? So I have a moral need or whatever, to kind of like make some progress on that. And then
Well, you still have to understand the question, I think. I don't
no,
think
but
that,
let me just add, that's fine, and you don't have to. But in terms of complexity, what I wanted to say was that for me, complexity is relevant concept in terms of practical application. So when I think of my philosophy, okay, and I'm trying always to focus on the simplest things and first principles, but in the end, the way the philosophy will get applied is that it's going to allow you to go from simple to complex. Okay, so that if I have simple things in tune, then it'll be very easy to then go over to very complex things, which will and they'll be all fine. So what the point then being that we don't have to, we can be independent agents. We don't have to completely be aligned with each other, but we want to be aligned enough to where we can be in harmony with this complexification. Okay. So maybe we're 10% on, in touch with each other. But if that's the right 10%, we can have an economy, we can, be good with the ecosystem and etc. So that would be kind of like my goal. And I think really the most interesting would be like to know how nature thinks, which is an important topic like Jay talks about. But from a practical point of view, this whole money thing, like, if we're trying to develop this culture, how can we make it relevant for people who do have money or relevant people who need money, right? And how does that whole work environment go? I would like, and that's where you really need people from different angles, that we're not all the same. We have different angles on that. So I would propose that problem. I don't know, Montijn, how that would fit with your whole, thing, but how would that be phrased? Is that a moral need or is that a, is that a science need?
Could you rephrase the problem?
So the question is like,
question?
Given that given that the concept of complexity is a practicality, it's a practical thing. How can we align ourselves in an economy that would be right for our culture? Okay, so we're trying to develop this Econet culture, and we'd like it to be relevant in all kinds of situations. And money is always very problematic. But what could be the role of money helpfully in our culture right now? Okay, like what are some guidelines? So in a particular, very concrete case, being like Ben is seeking capital for innovation. So, and we have opportunity to talk to people who have that kind of money. So I have those opportunity now. So
okay, so let's rephrase it then in the last so this is essentially epistemic foraging. So there's a certain decision to be made, a certain life decision. What am I going to do with that life? So why should we even care about this ecoculture? And we have a certain story we can tell ourselves. Well, it's beautiful, it can bloom, and we have people this and that. But we want to make a decision so that actually this will manifest. And then when we are now at the position we can have multiple choices, we learn to be as most informative as possible to actually know what story hides behind each outcome.
Yeah,
So
what's a story? And I wrote a paper, An Economy for Giving Everything Away, basically developing a story to say that give you a whole different way of thinking, that's actually very practical and functional. So the question is, can we develop a story that would explain how our culture that we seek coexists and thrives with money? Like it's not governed by money, it's not ruled by money, it's not really motivated by money, but it's able to
uh,
function with money.
it's a very beautiful question. How should we treat money? Like, what kind
Mhm.
of story do we wish to tell ourselves about how we treat money and what the downstream consequences of that will be? What will be
Mhm.
the most harmonious way, or you can phrase it in different ways, but just the story in and of itself. What's the most beautiful thing? And I think one of the things I think we all agree on what we should not do is treat money as an end. There's no beauty in it, I would say.
Right.
So
And it's
I
like
think,
what Andre was saying about complexity, right? Or money, right? Or like it's not like complexity is
well,
not an end in itself, right? Like we don't need to make
because
it complicated without any reason, right? Like, but it's a tool, a complex, or it's a, I don't know, it has its place.
yes, because but then it's like, okay, we should oh, suppose you have the question, what should I do with my company? And then you want to see a company flourish, and suppose you want to do that, then you can become very practical. Okay, how does my money and I'm spending my money affect future decisions to manifest that story? Um,
But
essentially,
this is not really
morality
about
is
our
less.
culture. It's not about a theoretical
Oh,
company.
yeah,
It's
but
about
that
our
was what
Econet culture. What's the role of
I
money in our
I
Econet
think
culture?
I think generally, if you set the kind of goal, the ultimate goal, what it all serves is morality. And when we have to set that goal, the methods we try to find that goal, that is left. That's just practicality. So we do not evaluate things anymore on the story in and of itself. That's only for the goal, the ultimate goal. And our sub goals to achieve that goal, we actually just value, okay, how much does it serve the
And,
goal
and,
we
to,
have in
and,
our
and
head?
to make it very practical, so here's somebody who raises tens of millions of dollars, right? And they want to have a conversation with me about Econet because I wrote a proposal for 1 million, euros a year ago, right? When everything's changed. But I want to know, okay, but what is the value of Econet for this person, and what is the value of that person for us? And I think there's a person who cares about ecological things. So where do we go with this? And the idea is to go slowly. We're not in a rush to go anywhere, but basically to say the kind of coincidence where Steph and Jerry met, right? Which I think is, just kind of really
Right
lovely.
here.
Yeah. So then the idea is that, okay, like what's the logic of that? How can we make this like a magnet for things like for those types of relationships, right? Like how does it, and then what's the role of money in that? Like how does money function in that type of little environment?
But anyways, yeah, it's a practical question, not a moral question, because you already have set your goal, and well, we just need to learn and be honest with ourselves.
Well, it's a moral question because we don't want to, we don't have any knowledge. We know that money is very abusive. So it's just it's a very abusive thing. So, and very distracting. So how do we, it's very
Oh,
moral.
yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Um. Anyway, yeah. Generally, I'm a bit tired, so my head is also. I
Okay, so
haven't slept.
Montijn, we're all switching over now to your room and we'll finish for 10 more minutes. Is that fine?
All right. Yes.
Okay. And I'll let you lead over, but you kind of see where we're going. I don't know if this, if
Yes.
maybe if you could finish with framing this in your world. Is that fine?
I will try.
Okay, try. Be strong.
An atom to carbon dioxide that generates energy. Now that can be traced into dollars or a unit of currency. It's a fundamental unit of currency that biological systems use, but you can then take it like you could say a ton of coal yields so many kilowatt hours of electricity. That's still oxidizing carbon dioxide. You can make that kind of a thing. So all of us burn a certain amount of carbon every day. That's how we live. That's why we eat food. That's why we breathe. And we do that. So we have an internal currency that's there. And that can be related then to societies burning oil or coal or natural gas to generate energy to do the other things that science does, society does. So we can make that kind of correlation. That may bear on this discussion.
I see. Thank you. I feel just because I will actually I will look into it myself because I feel my head right now is not working with me. Um, uh, but I'll decide. Yeah. Thank you. I will have to look into that. Um, so we started this question of this whole session with complexity and how should we think about complexity and how should we can thinking about complexity be useful in our lives? At least that's how I try to understand the question. And we've come somewhere. Generally, there wasn't one, really particular one specific question. We went down a lot of questions, and
Well, Montijn, can I add something
yes,
so we get back into whatever this cocoon or
yes, yes,
thing? Because I think when we're in this space where we've defined the boundaries or have the rules, or we all know what generative model we're pulling from,
yeah,
we can then more explicitly answer any question that arises.
yeah,
I think so. Just on the language front, Andrius, you may have missed just as we were transitioning in here, but I wanted Montaigne's sentence about money being an ends not to be the precise language, because I think sometimes money is an ends and we should acknowledge that, but our preference is that it's not the thing we're all oriented towards. It's that sometimes in the pathways of many choices, we could short term, choose this pathway that long term gets us to the place we want to go, and that may be relevant to the guy you're talking to or to Ben, but that we don't remove the possibility that money is an end as an immediate choice because our morals say money can't be an end. I just would prefer that our language doesn't restrict us precisely on that front.
Yes, and exactly that was said from other direction, through other prism by Jere, when he draw these parallels from conservative laws, yes, point of view, where this is money are just artificial energy for people. Yes, if you have money, you have potential to use some energy to draw people, to involve them in something, and so on and so on. So it's like energy potential, something like that, but not more, probably. Yes.
I like that, but I want to bring that together with Jerry, because across physical systems of all scales, I think Jerry's statement is well grounded. Then at the level of scale that kind of we're operating at in economy, or we're sometimes doing some very philosophical abstract thinking to get oriented well, we may need to coordinate, and we don't coordinate with carbon at this level. We coordinate in symbol, and that symbol, money fills that label, that gap, and anything could be used as money to facilitate as that symbol. But when you distribute the monetary phenomenon across many billions of people doing this frictionful interaction everywhere, you may lose the precise generative model, or it may corrupt, or the complexity may overwhelm. And so we want to get to a fundamental, or something that is highly preserving of the signal that you would hope to be on the coordination structure that money is doing, that you just said, Andre, that potential. So our words have to be precise, but also the money has to be precise, because we're using it as an object to facilitate mass coordination of mass resource, mass energy. And if that thing is imprecise, it could be corrupted.
I can say I organized independent thinkers for 12 years with my laboratory, Minshu Sodas, and there were just very few basic principles, which one of which was that like All of our work is in the public domain, except as noted otherwise, which means that people are sharing, contributing to the public, which kept people selfish people were out because selfish people don't want to do that. But another one was that money can bring people together, but you can't pay people to care. So like money is an external motivator and caring is an internal. And sometimes like for teaching or for nursing or for lots of things in life, you need internal motivation. And so people are going to get punished for internal motivation. Money can't reproduce that. People do it despite the fact that they get paid money, basically. That's how it works. So that's the kind of principle that would be relevant for an Econet culture to say, okay, if you put enough money on the table, you can get Putin and the Pope and Zelensky and Trump all on the same table, right? Just put down enough money. But you can't get them to care about each other. They have to care about each other somehow independently of that. So that's now that's the one principle basically I know, and then maybe another one was this whole idea of giving everything away. That like if you give everything away, you end up worrying about the same things, but in a different way. So, for example, like where you're going to eat lunch, you end up like if you're minimizing anxiety as opposed to maximizing happiness. So, the traditional economy, you're maximizing happiness. But this is saying, no, anyone giving anything away, it's anxious to have too much, it's anxious to have too little. I just want to avoid all that. So, then for the middle things, you'll let the market decide where to eat lunch. But for the little things, you'll say, you go first. I'm not going to fight over every little thing. And for the big things in life, you say, I'm going to make up my own mind what to do with my life. I'm not going to have the market decide, you see. So in the extremes, you look weird, but you're doing your own thing. Like how come you don't care about money, right? On the big things or little things. But in the medium-sized things, it's like you just go along with everybody else. It's just something like that. So those are I'll send links to that paper and to the proposal I wrote, etc. But we're trying to navigate that, look for that. And I think maybe the point is that we have different people in different roles with different financial situations and different needs and opportunities. How can our culture help to make something of that, right? As opposed to just avoiding it, but instead we're kind of like saying, well, it's not the reason, but we're a place where that can happen, right? And how does that happen? What's the logic of it? Montijn, please lead us through last words, and then please ask somebody to close us with a prayer, okay? You decide who you think would be best for that.
And thank you all. Maybe you've noticed, but yeah, I am a bit exhausted from my walking. I'm a bit.
You're walking slower than usual. That's I'm just
yes.
teasing you.
That's yeah, and a lot happened, and I think it's also partly to my brain that I just didn't get. I had trouble concentrating.
Just a moment of praise to you, Montijn, because you can see how all of your writings and thinkings are kind of like very much stimulating, inspiring us, leading us. It's leadership. But also just the evolution. I think like we want to be a culture of evolution, and just to see your thinking evolve, it's very inspiring and helps us all let go. Helps me let go to say, why am I not evolving like Montijn?
Yeah.
So I'll let you conclude. Thank you, Montijn.
Thank you. And I think how do I evolve? I think you're continuously pruning your model and asking yourself new questions, and then you slowly see what questions are useful in life and what questions are not useful in life. You continuously test that. That's I think a general thing. And yeah, I sleep every day. Like I do 3 naps a day where I just sit down on the couch, do a thing on my lap. I just think, okay, what should I prune? What should I not prune? Well, not in that literal sense, but yeah. Thank you for this talk about complexity. And Steph, would you like to have a closing remark?
Sure. Complexity is being cultivated in front of our eyes, sometimes hard to see. If you are looking for it, it's easier to see. And I know that is one of the main mandates and culture that's being cultivated here by Andrius, Montijn, Jere, and Andrej and myself. So I think we should all just acknowledge the fact that it's happened here in the room again, and that we can do it again.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll see you guys next time.
Okay. Peace and love. Complexity.
Peace.
That's it.
Complex and simple. Okay.
Complexity.